The classroom was quiet, almost too quiet. Jamal sat at the back, calm and focused, his notebook open but untouched. Around him, the other students whispered softly, stealing glances at the two professors standing at the front of the room. These professors were famous at the university, known not just for their intelligence, but also for their pride. They believed they were the smartest people in the building, and they enjoyed showing it. Today, they had a new target, a young, black student who had mostly kept to himself, Jamal. The professors exchanged a quick, almost invisible nod, and the taller one, Professor Simmons, spoke. "Today, we will tackle a problem that most of you will find challenging," he said, a slight smirk forming at the corner of his mouth. The other professor, Dr. Langford, handed a thick sheet of paper to Jamal. He looked down at it, pretending to be interested, but his expression betrayed a hidden plan. "You, Mr. Jamal, will attempt to solve this on the board. We want to see how far you can go." A wave of whispers ran through the classroom. Some students were curious. Others felt the tension. Jamal looked up, meeting the eyes of the professors. Without fear, he didn't say a word. He just stood, took the paper, and walked confidently to the front. The room felt heavier with each step he took, as if everyone held their breath. Professor Simmons cleared his throat, leaning slightly forward. "Now, let's see what you can do," he said, his voice calm, but his eyes sharp. Everyone expected Jamal to struggle. After all, this problem was considered nearly impossible. It was designed to make students sweat, and Jamal had just been chosen to fail in front of the whole class. Jamal looked at the problem. It was complex, filled with numbers and symbols that could confuse anyone. But he didn't panic. His mind began to work, calmly organizing each part of the problem. His pen moved quickly across the board as he started writing down steps. Each equation, each calculation flowed naturally, as if he had done this thousands of times before. The professors exchanged a glance. They were confident, too confident. They thought he might freeze, make a mistake, or just guess incorrectly. They didn't know Jamal had a gift, a way of seeing numbers and patterns that was rare, even among the smartest students. He had spent countless nights studying alone, figuring out solutions that most textbooks never mentioned. Students leaned forward, some curious, some skeptical. As Jamal wrote, he explained his steps softly, making it sound simple, almost easy. He didn't rush, but he didn't hesitate either. His voice was calm, confident, and steady. The first few steps were simple enough that the professors nodded, slowly, still trying to hide their surprise. Then Jamal did something unexpected. He used a method the professors had never taught in class, a shortcut that solved part of the problem faster than they thought possible. A few students gasped quietly. Professor Langford's eyes widened slightly, but he quickly masked it with a cough. Professor Simmons, on the other hand, felt a small knot of panic forming in his chest. This was not going according to plan. "Explain your method," Professor Simmons said, trying to regain control. His tone was firm, but there was a slight tremor that only someone paying close attention could notice. Jamal didn't hesitate. He calmly explained the logic, step by step, making it clear that he wasn't guessing. He understood exactly what he was doing. The classroom became silent. Again, everyone listened closely, realizing this wasn't a typical student struggling through the problem. This was someone who truly understood it, someone who could see solutions others couldn't. Jamal moved to the next part of the problem, solving it with speed and precision. The professors tried to find a mistake, but there was none. Every step was correct. Every calculation made sense. Some students began whispering among themselves, unable to contain their amazement. "Did you see that?" one said. "He's incredible." Another added, "I've never seen anyone do it like that before." Meanwhile, Jamal stayed focused, completely aware of the eyes on him, but not distracted. He didn't need their approval. and he didn't need their intimidation. He simply let his mind work. Professor Simmons felt a flicker of doubt. He had expected to humiliate Jamal, to show the class who was really in charge. But now it seemed that he had underestimated him. Professor Langford frowned slightly, pride mixing with frustration. They had thought they were in control, but the student standing in front of them was proving them wrong in real time. Jamal paused for a moment, looked at the final equation on the board, and wrote down the answer confidently. He stepped back, holding the marker lightly in his hand, and looked around the classroom. No one spoke, not a word. Even the professors were silent, unable to hide the shock in their eyes. The problem had been solved, and not just solved, it had been solved perfectly, in a way no one had anticipated. Finally, a quiet murmur started to grow into whispers of awe. Students glanced at each other, realizing that the quiet, unassuming student had just outshone the very professors who had tried to embarrass him. Jamal smiled faintly, humble yet confident as he returned to his seat. He didn't gloat, he didn't boast. He simply let his work speak for itself. And in that moment, the classroom changed. What was meant to be a scene of humiliation had become a moment of revelation. Jamal wasn't just a student. He was a genius, and the professors had no idea what they had just unleashed. The room was still buzzing quietly after Jamal returned to his seat. The professors were no longer smirking. Instead, there was a strange mix of shock, doubt, and curiosity on their faces. Jamal, however, remained calm. He had anticipated their reactions. This was just the beginning. What they didn't know was that his mind was already racing ahead, planning the next steps, preparing for what would come next. Professor Simmons cleared his throat and leaned forward. "Well, that was impressive," he said, his voice a little forced, trying to hide the embarrassment. "But let's see how you handle something more complex, something that requires deeper thinking." He pulled out a second problem, one that had confounded even graduate students before. The professors exchanged glances, thinking this time Jamal might stumble. Jamal's eyes lit up slightly as he looked at the new problem. Unlike the first one, this was a puzzle that demanded creativity, not just knowledge. Many students in the class shifted uneasily in their seats. They could see that this problem was not just about solving numbers, it was about seeing connections that weren't obvious. Some of them tried to imagine themselves in Jamal's place, feeling the pressure mounting. With slow, deliberate steps, Jamal stood again and walked to the board. He didn't rush. He knew that the professors were watching his every move, waiting for him to make a mistake. He could almost feel their thoughts trying to trick him, trying to catch him off guard. But Jamal had learned long ago that fear and doubt were tools the arrogant often used against those they underestimated. He wouldn't give them that satisfaction. He picked up the marker and began writing. At first, his calculations looked simple, almost ordinary. Some students leaned forward curious, but others looked confused, thinking that maybe he didn't understand the complexity. The professors, confident once again, exchanged smug looks. "He's only bluffing," Professor Langford whispered to Simmons. "He doesn't realize this problem is several levels above him." But Jamal wasn't bluffing. He worked silently, carefully combining logic, patterns, and intuition. Every line he wrote was part of a bigger picture that only he could see. His method wasn't taught in any textbook or lecture. It was the result of hours of thinking, exploring, and questioning the usual rules of mathematics. As he wrote, he explained his reasoning in a calm, steady voice, making the complex seem almost easy. Some students began to whisper, "He's doing something we've never seen before," and "How does he even think like that?" But others remained skeptical, still thinking the professors might be right. They had all been trained to respect authority and experience, and these professors were legends in their field. How could a student, someone so young and quiet, possibly outthink them? Professor Simmons tried to interrupt him, attempting to challenge Jamal's method. "Are you sure that step is correct?" he asked, hoping to catch him in an error. But Jamal looked at him with calm eyes and answered, explaining clearly why his logic was correct. The professor tried another question, a tricky twist meant to confuse, but again Jamal answered perfectly. Each response was precise, confident, and impossible to refute. By now, the classroom had shifted. The students were no longer just observers. They were witnesses to something extraordinary. Jamal's quiet confidence and brilliant mind were turning the tide. The smugness of the professors was fading, replaced by unease and disbelief. They had tried to assert their superiority, but the student in front of them was proving that intelligence could not be underestimated. For a moment, the room went completely silent. Jamal paused at the board and looked at the final calculation. A faint smile touched his lips. This was it, the solution. He carefully wrote down the final answer, a solution that was elegant, unexpected, and brilliant. The students leaned in, realizing that they were watching history in the making in their own classroom. Professor Langford's jaw tightened. He had seen a lot of talent in his years, but this was different. There was no doubt now that Jamal was exceptional. Professor Simmons felt a knot of fear and awe in his stomach. They had tried to embarrass him, to make him fail in front of everyone, but instead they had given him a stage to showcase his genius. Some students began quietly clapping, while others whispered words of admiration. "That was amazing," one said. "I can't believe it." Jamal returned to his seat, but he didn't gloat. His calm demeanor only made his brilliance shine brighter. He had let his work speak for itself, and it was louder than any words could be. After class, the professors held a quiet discussion behind closed doors. "We underestimated him," Professor Simmons admitted, his voice low. "Completely underestimated him." Professor Langford nodded, a mixture of frustration and respect in his eyes. "We need to rethink everything. This student, he's not just good, he's extraordinary." Meanwhile, students gathered around Jamal, asking questions and trying to understand his methods. Jamal answered patiently, never boasting, never showing arrogance. He wanted them to learn, to see that brilliance wasn't about showing off. It was about understanding, persistence, and curiosity. As the day ended, Jamal walked out of the classroom, his mind already moving forward, thinking about the next challenge. The professors stayed behind, silent and thoughtful, realizing that they had been defeated, not by arrogance, but by a mind that refused to be underestimated. And so, the stage was set. Jamal had won the first round of a battle that was only beginning. The professors had learned one lesson. You can try to humiliate a genius, but a true mind cannot be humiliated. The next morning, the campus was buzzing with excitement. Word had spread about what happened in the classroom. Jamal, the quiet student who rarely spoke, had solved problems that even the elite professors considered impossible. Students whispered as he passed by, some nodding in respect, others staring in awe. Even strangers in the hallways had heard the story and were curious. It seemed like everyone wanted to know more about the young man who had humiliated the professors without even trying. Meanwhile, the professors gathered in their office, their earlier shock turning into something more urgent. They were used to being the smartest people in any room. They were used to commanding respect and awe, but Jamal had disrupted that balance, and they didn't know how to respond. Professor Simmons paced back and forth, muttering under his breath. "We can't let this go. No student should make us look like amateurs. We need to challenge him again, something even he can't handle." Professor Langford shook his head. "We tried the toughest problems we know. He solved them all. Honestly, I'm not sure there is anything in our curriculum that can match him." There was a hint of admiration in his voice, but it was buried under frustration. They couldn't let it show. They had to protect their pride. Jamal, on the other hand, was unaware of their private conversation. He went about his day calmly, attending lectures and helping classmates with smaller problems. He wasn't seeking attention, he just loved math, and numbers fascinated him more than anything else. While others gossiped, Jamal focused on understanding the deeper patterns, exploring ideas no one had asked him to, solving puzzles purely for the joy of it. That afternoon, the professors returned to the classroom, determined to regain their authority. They prepared a new problem, one they considered nearly impossible even for graduate students. This problem wasn't just complex, it required creative thinking, reasoning beyond traditional formulas, and connecting ideas that seemed unrelated. They had purposefully chosen it for Jamal, hoping this time he would fail. As Jamal entered the classroom, he noticed the papers waiting for him on the desk. He looked at the professors and saw their expressions, confidence mixed with tension. He didn't smile. He didn't react. He simply picked up the paper and read the problem carefully. His eyes moved across the numbers and symbols, scanning for patterns, identifying hidden connections. The class watched in anticipation. Some students felt nervous for Jamal. Others couldn't hide their curiosity, wondering if he could do it again. The professors leaned against the podium, smirking at first, but there was an undercurrent of worry in their movements. They had underestimated him before, and they didn't want it to happen again. Jamal stood slowly, marker in hand, and began writing on the board. At first, his approach seemed cautious, almost deliberate. The professors whispered among themselves, confident that they had finally caught him in a moment of hesitation. But then, Jamal's method began to unfold. Every step he wrote revealed a new perspective on the problem, a way of connecting numbers, and logic that no one in the room had considered. Professor Simmons frowned. "That's unusual," he muttered under his breath. "I've never seen this approach before." Professor Langford leaned closer, studying Jamal's method carefully. "It's brilliant," he admitted softly, though he quickly covered it with a cough. Even they had to recognize that this was beyond ordinary thinking. Jamal paused midway through the problem, explaining his reasoning as he went. "You see," he said calmly, "if we consider this sequence not just as numbers, but as patterns in relationships, the solution becomes clear." His words were simple, but they carried weight. Every student leaned closer, trying to follow his thought process. Some could understand parts of it, others could only watch in amazement. As Jamal completed the final steps, the professors attempted to challenge him again, throwing questions meant to confuse him. But Jamal anticipated their questions instinctively. He answered every query with precision, never hesitating, never faltering. It became clear to everyone that this wasn't luck or memorization. Jamal understood the problem at a level the professors had never imagined. By the time he wrote down the final answer, the room was silent. Not a single student dared speak. The professors stared at the board, their pride wounded, their confidence shaken. They had tried to humiliate him. They had tried to show the class who was in charge, but Jamal had turned it around completely. He hadn't just solved the problem, he had redefined it, showing solutions they hadn't thought possible. The students began to clap quietly at first, then louder, unable to contain their admiration. Some whispered words of astonishment. "He's a genius," one said. "I've never seen anything like this." Even those who had been skeptical moments earlier found themselves amazed. Jamal smiled faintly and returned to his seat humble and calm. He didn't need applause or recognition. His satisfaction came from understanding, from solving something others had failed to grasp. After the class ended, students gathered around Jamal, asking questions, trying to learn from him. He answered, patiently, explaining his reasoning without arrogance. Meanwhile, the professors stayed behind, their discussion more serious than before. "We need to rethink our approach," Professor Simmons said quietly. "This student, he's not just talented, he's exceptional." Professor Langford nodded. "And we need to be careful. His brilliance is clear, and if we try to belittle him again, it will only backfire. He commands respect now, and rightly so." Both professors realized that Jamal's mind was not just extraordinary, it was a force they could not ignore. As Jamal walked out of the classroom, the whispers followed. Him, his quiet determination, his genius, and his calm confidence had left an unforgettable mark. The professors had learned a valuable lesson. Underestimating brilliance comes with consequences, and Jamal had only just begun to show the world what he could do. After the events in the classroom, Jamal became a quiet legend on campus. Students whispered about him in hallways, in cafeterias, even outside the library. Some were curious to know who he really was. Others just wanted to watch him work, hoping to learn something from the mind that had stunned the professors. But Jamal, as always, kept to himself. He never sought attention, never bragged, and never flaunted his genius. He simply wanted to solve problems, understand patterns, and explore ideas no one else dared to consider. That afternoon, while walking back to his dorm, Jamal thought about the events of the last few days. He knew he had impressed the professors, but he also understood their pride had been wounded. Some of them might try to challenge him again, perhaps in ways that weren't fair or respectful. He didn't fear them. He had learned long ago that fear was a tool used by people to control others, and he refused to let it rule his mind. What Jamal feared instead was the idea that some people might never see the value of persistence, curiosity, and hard work, that they might always judge talent without understanding it. His thoughts drifted back to his earlier life. Growing up, Jamal had always loved numbers. While other children played outside, he would sit at the small wooden table in his room, scribbling equations on sheets of paper, drawing patterns in the margins of old notebooks. He remembered the nights when he would stay up late, solving problems that even his older cousins couldn't understand. Math was more than numbers to him. It was a language, a way to understand the world. But it hadn't always been easy. Jamal had faced many challenges. Some teachers doubted him because of his quiet nature. Others didn't understand his approach and labeled it unusual. And there were moments when classmates laughed at him, calling him strange for spending hours on problems instead of playing sports or video games. Those moments had hurt, but they had also made him stronger. Jamal learned that genius wasn't about winning the approval of others. It was about trusting your mind, believing in your abilities, and never giving up, no matter the obstacles. As he reached the dorm, Jamal saw a group of students gathered outside, looking anxious and excited. They waved him over, and some of them started asking questions about the problems from class. He smiled gently and knelt to show them a simpler way to approach the patterns. The students were amazed, not just by his brilliance, but by his patience and kindness. Jamal didn't make them feel small for not understanding. Instead, he encouraged them to think, to explore, to challenge themselves. Later that evening, Jamal sat alone in the library, surrounded by stacks of textbooks and notebooks filled with his calculations. He was working on a new problem. One he had devised himself, combining concepts from algebra, geometry, and logic. He wanted to see if he could find a solution no one else could. The quiet hum of the library, the faint glow of the desk lamp, and the soft scratch of his pencil on paper created a sense of calm focus. For Jamal, this was happiness. This was where he felt most alive. Meanwhile, back in the professor's office, the discussions had grown more serious. "We underestimated him at every step," Professor Simmons said, frustration in his voice. "He's not just a student, he's a thinker, a problem solver at a level most of us have never seen." Professor Langford leaned back in his chair, nodding. "We need to approach this differently. We can't try to challenge him in the same ways as before. If we push too hard, we risk pushing him away, or worse, showing our ignorance again." They realized that Jamal's brilliance wasn't just about solving problems. It was about creativity, logic, and perspective. He was not following their rules. He was creating his own. The next day, Jamal walked into class to a completely different atmosphere. The students were quiet, respectful, and attentive. The professors no longer wore smug expressions. Instead, there was cautious curiosity in their eyes. They had realized that Jamal's mind could not be trapped by standard methods. He saw connections that others couldn't. He could solve problems that had baffled experts for years, and more importantly, he did it with humility. Professor Simmons cleared his throat. "Today, we won't test you with impossible problems," he said slowly. "Instead, we want to understand your approach, your reasoning, and your methods. We want to learn from you, if you are willing." Jamal looked up, his calm eyes meeting theirs. He nodded slightly. He didn't feel pride. He felt an opportunity. For the first time, the professors were offering to learn, not dominate. Jamal began explaining his thought process step by step. He showed the students and professors how he approached complex problems, how he looked for patterns, how he combined ideas in new ways. The room was silent, every mind focused as they tried to absorb his reasoning. Some students were still struggling to understand, but they were inspired. They could see that intelligence wasn't just about memorizing formulas. It was about thinking differently. As class ended, the professors stayed behind, visibly impressed. They realized that Jamal was teaching them a lesson they had never expected. True genius cannot be measured by pride, position, or tradition. It exists in curiosity, perseverance, and the courage to think beyond the ordinary. Jamal walked out of the classroom, unnoticed by some, admired by many. He didn't need recognition. His goal was not to prove himself to anyone. It was to explore, to understand, and to grow. But what he didn't know was that his calm confidence and quiet brilliance had already inspired a wave of respect and admiration that would follow him throughout the campus and beyond. And so Jamal's journey continued, not as a student trying to prove himself, but as a mind daring to explore, to teach, and to inspire, one problem at a time. The following week, the university announced a prestigious math competition. It wasn't just any contest, it was a national-level event, drawing participants from top schools across the country. Professors and students alike whispered excitedly. Jamal's name had already spread through the campus. Some thought he would participate, others assumed he might avoid the spotlight. But Jamal, as always, wasn't seeking attention. He entered quietly, carrying only his notebook and a calm focus in his eyes. The competition hall was enormous. Hundreds of students sat at long tables, pencils and calculators in hand, as a massive screen displayed the opening problem. The room buzzed with nervous energy. Jamal scanned the problem carefully. It was complicated, more intricate than anything he had encountered in class. Even the top competitors looked uneasy. Their fingers tapped anxiously. Calculators clicked, and some students whispered strategies to each other, but Jamal remained calm, his mind already moving through layers of logic, connecting dots that others couldn't even see. The first problem required creativity and precision. Most students struggled to find the correct approach, making small mistakes that cost them time. Jamal, on the other hand, analyzed the problem from multiple angles, breaking it into smaller parts and spotting patterns instantly. Every step he took was deliberate, yet fast. He wrote equations neatly on his paper, checking his work carefully before moving to the next part. Hours passed and the problems grew more difficult. Some involved complex geometry, others required advanced algebra or probability. Many competitors began to sweat, their confidence faltering under the pressure. Jamal's focus never wavered. He wasn't racing against anyone else. He was competing against the problem itself, enjoying the challenge of solving something truly complex. By the time the final round began, only a handful of students remained. The last problem was rumored to be nearly impossible, a puzzle designed by the competition's top mathematicians. The professors watching from the sidelines whispered among themselves, "If anyone can solve this, it's him," one said quietly, nodding toward Jamal. The others frowned, unwilling to admit it aloud. They had seen his brilliance in class, but watching him in a high-pressure competition was something else entirely. Jamal read the final problem carefully. It required not only advanced calculations, but also a creative leap of logic. Many students froze, staring at the paper, unsure where to begin. But Jamal's mind moved swiftly. He recognized a hidden pattern that others had overlooked, connecting concepts from different areas of mathematics in a way that seemed almost intuitive. His pencil moved across the paper, writing down solutions, checking each step, erasing when necessary and starting again if he found a better approach. Time ticked away. The hall grew silent as the judges monitored the final submissions. Every student hoped they had done well, but Jamal's calm confidence unnerved some of them. Even the other top competitors couldn't hide their curiosity, sneaking glances at his work. They had heard about him in class, but seeing him in action was unlike anything they had imagined. Finally, the timer rang, signaling the end of the competition. Students put down their pencils, some sighing in relief, others looking worried. Jamal closed his notebook and handed it to the judges without a word. He didn't need to boast. The results would speak for themselves. The judges reviewed the submissions meticulously. They had expected clever solutions, but Jamal's work was different. His methods were elegant, precise, and creative. Not only had he solved the problem correctly, but he had also discovered a shortcut, a way to reach the solution faster without losing accuracy. The judges exchanged astonished glances. One of them whispered, "I've never seen anyone do this before, not even at this level." When the winners were announced, Jamal's name was called first. The crowd erupted in applause, but Jamal didn't react dramatically. He accepted the trophy with a quiet smile, shaking hands with the other finalists respectfully. He had won, yes, but for him, the real victory was the satisfaction of solving the problem, of seeing the beauty in the numbers, of knowing he had challenged himself and succeeded. Back at the university, the news spread quickly. Students were inspired and professors were humbled. Those who had once doubted him realized they had witnessed something extraordinary. Jamal's victory wasn't just about winning a competition. It was about proving that determination, focus, and genuine understanding could outshine pride, arrogance, and doubt. That evening, Jamal sat alone in his dorm room, reflecting on the day. The trophy sat on his desk, shining under the lamplight, but he didn't think about fame or recognition. He thought about the problems he had solved, the patterns he had uncovered, and the new ideas that now sparked in his mind. For him, the journey wasn't over. There were still puzzles to solve, questions to answer, and challenges to embrace. Even the professors began to rethink their approach. They realized that trying to humiliate or challenge Jamal had been futile. Instead, they needed to learn from him, to understand his methods, and perhaps even adopt some of his approaches in their teaching. Jamal had not just won a competition. He had reshaped the way they thought about learning, intelligence and curiosity, and so Jamal's story continued. He had faced one of the toughest challenges yet and had emerged victorious, not through arrogance, but through brilliance, patience, and humility. His journey was far from over, and the world had only begun to see the depth of his genius. After his national victory, Jamal returned to campus to an entirely new atmosphere. Students treated him with admiration, and even the professors who once doubted him now approached him with a cautious respect. But Jamal noticed something subtle. There were whispers in corners, lingering glances from some classmates, and an occasional chill in the classroom air. Not everyone was happy about his success. That afternoon, as Jamal was walking through the library, he noticed a group of students huddled together, speaking in low voices. Their eyes followed him. He didn't want to confront them directly. He had learned that curiosity and understanding were better than conflict. Still, he could sense tension. Some of the students were jealous, others intimidated. Jamal knew that true genius often draws attention, both good and bad, and he had to navigate carefully. Meanwhile, the professors began planning a seminar. They wanted to showcase Jamal's methods, inviting students and faculty from other departments. The announcement excited some, but it also triggered resentment among a few professors who felt threatened. They had spent years teaching, thinking. They were guiding the brightest minds, only to see Jamal, a quiet and unassuming student, surpass them. Some whispered about whether his methods were unconventional or risky. Jamal, unaware of the undercurrents, focused on his next challenge. A new research project had been announced. A real-world math problem with social implications. The university partnered with a city organization struggling to optimize traffic flow. They hoped to reduce accidents, manage congestion, and improve public safety. It was a complex problem, requiring not just calculations, but creative problem-solving and understanding human behavior. Jamal's professors suggested he participate, though some doubted he could handle it outside the controlled environment of textbooks and competitions. When Jamal first saw the project, he smiled. Unlike the competitions, this wasn't about winning a trophy or proving intelligence. This was about making a difference. He studied the maps, the traffic reports, and the flow patterns. Hours turned into days as he observed intersections, noted behaviors, and ran simulations. Some of the students in the project team were frustrated, overwhelmed by the scale of the problem, but Jamal's calm approach began to influence them. He didn't criticize mistakes. Instead, he explained concepts in a way that made sense. Slowly, they started to see the patterns he saw. But as the project progressed, Jamal encountered unexpected resistance. One of the senior professors, who had never admitted defeat, started questioning every step he took. "This method isn't standard," the professor said. "You're breaking every rule we follow." Jamal listened politely and explained his reasoning. He showed simulations, calculations, and projections. The results were undeniable, but the professor refused to accept them immediately. Jamal realized that brilliance alone sometimes wasn't enough. People's egos and fears could be bigger obstacles than the problems themselves. One evening, while working late, Jamal received an anonymous note slipped under his dorm door. It read, "Stop showing off. Not everyone is ready for someone like you. Some lessons are learned the hard way." Jamal felt a chill but didn't panic. He had faced judgment, criticism, and even ridicule before. This was different. It was direct and personal. But instead of fear, he felt determination. Whoever had sent the note underestimated him. Jamal understood that courage wasn't the absence of fear. It was the ability to move forward despite it. The next day, during a meeting with city officials, Jamal presented his model. The simulations predicted a reduction in traffic congestion by over 40%, a dramatic decrease in potential accidents, and more efficient use of public transportation. The officials were amazed. One of them said, "This is incredible. We've never seen anything like it. How did you come up with this?" Jamal smiled humbly. "I observed patterns and thought about solutions that worked for real people," he said simply. News of his success spread rapidly. Local newspapers ran stories about the student genius who was solving city problems that professionals had struggled with for years. Social media buzzed with praise and curiosity. Jamal didn't seek the attention, but he realized that his work could truly impact lives. The same genius that had impressed professors and students in competitions was now making a real difference in the world. Yet, not everyone was pleased. Some jealous peers and old-minded professors began plotting to discredit his work. They questioned his methods, tried to find errors where there were none, and whispered doubts to officials. Jamal noticed the tension but remained focused. He knew that challenges weren't always about solving equations. They were also about handling skepticism, envy, and obstacles that had nothing to do with intelligence. By the end of the semester, the project's results were undeniable. The city adopted several of Jamal's solutions, reporting immediate improvements in traffic management and safety. Jamal's professors, even the most skeptical, had to acknowledge his contributions publicly. Some came to him privately, admitting their mistakes and asking for guidance. Jamal accepted with humility. He didn't seek revenge or pride. He only wanted to continue learning and helping. As Jamal walked through the city streets at night, observing the flow of traffic and the subtle changes his work had brought, he realized something important. Real genius wasn't just about numbers or competitions. It was about courage, patience, and the willingness to face challenges even when others doubted you. And he knew that bigger challenges were still ahead, ones that might test not just his mind, but his character, determination, and resilience. The next semester began with an unusual buzz across the campus. Jamal had become more than a student. He was now a symbol of brilliance and potential. Students whispered his name in hallways, and professors who had once tried to embarrass him now hesitated before questioning him. But fame wasn't Jamal's goal. He had bigger plans. A national math and science summit was being held in the city, and he had been invited as a guest speaker. This was a rare opportunity, a stage to showcase not only his talent, but his ideas, to leaders, innovators, and educators from across the country. Jamal prepared quietly. He wanted his presentation to focus on solving real problems, not just impressing the audience with formulas. He spent days refining models, creating simulations, and anticipating questions. Meanwhile, whispers of envy and doubt grew louder. Some professors openly criticized the summit organizers, claiming Jamal's ideas were unproven or too unconventional. Even a few students started spreading rumors. "He's not as smart as everyone says," they said, trying to downplay his achievements. Jamal ignored them, as always. He had learned that jealousy often followed talent and that focus was the best response. The day of the summit arrived. The venue was massive, filled with hundreds of academics, policymakers, and journalists. Cameras lined the aisles, ready to broadcast every moment. Jamal walked onto the stage, carrying only a small laptop and his calm confidence. The audience gave polite applause, but Jamal knew he had to earn their attention, not rely on it. He began with a simple statement. Mathematics is not about numbers alone. It is about understanding patterns, predicting outcomes, and improving the world we live in. With each word, he drew the audience in, showing simulations of traffic patterns, climate models, and resource management solutions. He demonstrated how a small change in approach could have massive impacts. People in the audience leaned forward, captivated by the clarity and practicality of his ideas. Then came the questions. At first they were routine, but one senior professor, notorious for his arrogance, asked a sharp, almost hostile question. Your models are impressive for theory, but how do you know they will work in real-life situations? How can a student still learning be trusted with solutions that affect thousands? The room grew tense. Many expected Jamal to hesitate, to falter under the weight of the question. Jamal paused, then smiled slightly. Experience is valuable, he said, but insight is not limited to age or title. I have tested my models in real situations, and the results speak for themselves. Every solution I propose is backed by data, simulations, and careful observation. He projected before and after maps of the city's traffic systems he had worked on. Here are the real-world results. Patterns predicted mathematically, executed practically, reducing congestion and accidents. The audience murmured, impressed, but the professor's frown deepened. He wasn't just skeptical, he felt his authority challenged. Another question came, even sharper this time. What if your solutions fail on a larger scale? What if public safety is compromised? A few students gasped. Jamal's calm gaze swept over the audience. He spoke slowly, deliberately. Every model carries uncertainty, but careful observation, constant monitoring and adjustments make it possible to predict and prevent failure. Risk exists, but it can be managed intelligently. I do not claim to know everything, but I do claim to approach problems logically and responsibly. A hush fell over the room. The audience realized Jamal was not just answering questions, he was demonstrating leadership, patience, and strategic thinking. Even the most critical professors had to pause and acknowledge his composure. But the senior professor wasn't done. He leaned forward and said, "You may solve problems mathematically, but life is unpredictable. You're talented, yes, but you lack experience." Jamal's eyes narrowed slightly, not in anger, but with a calm determination that made the room tense. Experience can teach methods, but insight teaches solutions. I have applied my knowledge to real situations, observed outcomes and learned. From every success and failure, talent without humility is useless. Humility without application is wasted potential. I believe both must work together to create results. The room was silent for a moment. Then, unexpectedly, applause began. Not polite but strong and growing. People stood, realizing that Jamal was not only brilliant but also wise beyond his years. His calm, humble demeanor and sharp reasoning silenced critics and inspired supporters. The senior professor leaned back, stunned. He had underestimated this young student, believing that authority and years of experience could intimidate Jamal. But the opposite had happened. After the summit, Jamal was approached by multiple leaders, offering opportunities to apply his models in different cities, universities, and research projects. Invitations poured in, but Jamal remained selective. He wanted challenges where his work could have meaningful impact, not just accolades. Yet he understood something crucial. The world would never be free of skeptics, critics, or challenges that tested not just intellect, but patience, courage, and integrity. Walking back to his hotel that evening, Jamal reflected on the day. The key summit had been his biggest challenge yet, not in terms of calculations, but in facing human judgment, skepticism, and expectation. He had shown that intelligence alone was not enough. Character, composure, and humility were equally important. Jamal knew the journey wasn't over. Bigger challenges, greater obstacles, and higher stakes awaited. But for the first time, he felt a shift. People were starting to see him not just as a student or a genius, but as someone who could lead, inspire, and change the world. And Jamal was ready. Jamal returned home from the summit, exhausted but inspired. The experience had shown him the power of his ideas and the strength of his character, yet he sensed that his greatest challenge was still ahead. Invitations and praise had flooded in, but one message stood out: an international mathematics and innovation competition where the world's brightest minds would gather. Winners would have the chance to work on global projects, solving real-world crises, from climate change to public safety. Jamal realized that this was more than a competition. It was a test of everything he had learned about intelligence, courage, and perseverance. Weeks of preparation followed. Jamal analyzed complex problems, ran simulations, and designed new algorithms. But unlike before, he faced internal doubts. Could he, a young student from a modest background, truly compete with geniuses trained in elite institutions around the world? The memory of professors trying to embarrass him lingered, but instead of fear, it now fueled determination. He reminded himself of every challenge he had overcome: the mockery in classrooms, the national competition, the city project, and the summit. Each had tested not only his skill, but his patience, his humility, and his focus. The day of the international competition arrived. Jamal entered a vast hall filled with bright minds from every corner of the globe. Some competitors glanced at him with curiosity, others with thinly veiled arrogance. They had expected a nervous, inexperienced student, not someone with calm confidence and sharp intellect. Jamal took a deep breath, focusing on his purpose. He wasn't there to prove anything to them. He was there to solve problems that could make a real difference. The first round tested theoretical understanding. Jamal solved complex equations with precision, finishing ahead of most participants. But the second round was where the real challenge lay: real-world applications. Each participant was given a scenario involving logistics, resource management, or public systems, and they had to propose practical, implementable solutions. Jamal was assigned a problem involving global food distribution, a scenario complicated by political instability, natural disasters, and population growth. Jamal studied the data carefully. He mapped supply chains, analyzed transportation systems, and factored in variables that others overlooked. Hours passed. Some competitors grew frustrated, making hasty calculations. Jamal remained patient, double-checking every step. Slowly, his model began to take shape, elegant in its simplicity, yet profound in impact. By the end of the day, he submitted a solution that could optimize food distribution globally, reduce waste, and save millions of lives. When the results were announced, Jamal's name was called, not just as a winner, but as the person with the highest score overall. The hall erupted in applause. Cameras flashed, and journalists rushed to interview him. But even amid the excitement, Jamal's mind was calm. He thought of the professors who had doubted him, the students who had whispered behind his back, and the city officials who had initially questioned his methods. Every obstacle, every challenge, every criticism had prepared him for this moment. As he stepped onto the stage to receive his award, Jamal spoke quietly but firmly. "I am honored, but this recognition is not just about winning. It is about understanding that intelligence is not measured by degrees, awards, or recognition. True intelligence is about solving problems, helping people, and facing challenges with courage and humility." The audience listened, captivated not just by his words, but by the quiet strength in his voice. After the ceremony, world leaders and organizations approached him with opportunities to implement his ideas on a global scale. Jamal accepted selectively, focusing on projects where he could make meaningful change. He remembered a lesson he had learned long ago: talent without purpose was wasted. Now, he had both talent and purpose. Later that evening, Jamal returned to his dorm room, exhausted but fulfilled. He opened a notebook where he had documented every problem he had faced, every solution he had created, and every lesson he had learned. He realized something profound. Life would always present challenges, skepticism, and obstacles. People would doubt him, try to discredit him, or underestimate his abilities. But courage, persistence, and integrity would always carry him through. For Jamal, the journey was not just about being a math genius or winning competitions. It was about proving that determination, intelligence, and kindness could overcome arrogance and prejudice. It was about showing the world that a single person, armed with knowledge and courage, could make a difference. As he looked out of the window at the city lights, Jamal smiled. He knew the journey ahead would be even more demanding, with challenges far greater than competitions or classrooms. But he was ready. He had learned that true success was not about proving others wrong. It was about using your gifts to do good, to inspire others, and to leave a positive mark on the world. And in that moment, Jamal understood that nothing, not envy, not prejudice, not doubt, could ever stop someone who combined brilliance with integrity, who faced challenges head-on, and who refused to let fear dictate their path. The world had seen his genius, but more importantly, it had seen his heart, and that, Jamal realized, was the greatest victory of all.